The sun hit the canyon floor like a hammer on an anvil that morning, already promising a day that would test the sweat from a man. We were deep in the Devil's Gulch, 2 weeks out from any sensible civilization, laying track for the southern Pacific. The air tasted of dust and dry rock, and the only sound was the scrape of our shovels against the gravel and the distant thin whine of the transit. It was 1911, and we were trying to map a path through a land that had no interest in being charted. My name is Thomas McCready. Late 40s then. Though the sun had already carved enough lines into my face to make me look older, my skin was leathered, my eyes a pale blue, always scanning the horizon, always looking for what was next or what was out of place. I wore canvas and denim, dust-stained and worn, a wide-brimmed hat keeping the worst of the sun off. I moved with a quiet efficiency, my hands calloused, my voice gravelly. I prided myself on logic, on order, on the measured certainty of a transit line. The desert was a challenge, not a mystery. It had rules, and we were learning them, we thought. The canyon itself was a natural funnel. Rust-red rock rising hundreds of feet on either side, carved by water that had flowed here long before any man walked it. Above us, the jagged cliff face was riddled with dark openings like a honeycomb of forgotten mouths, silent and inaccessible. The heat pressed down, a physical weight, blurring the edges of the distant mountains, making the air shimmer and dance. It was a place that felt ancient, indifferent to our presence, a temporary intrusion of steel and ambition into something vast and primordial. Silas, a man in his late 50s, was at the transit. He had a steady hand, a veteran of these crews, quiet and unassuming. He preferred his measurements to conversation. Billy Hatcher, barely 19, was holding the stadia rod down canyon. He was tall, gangly, still growing into his frame, his sandy hair always falling into his bright, eager eyes. Billy idolized the work, idolized the idea of the West. His clothes, though practical, still had the pressed neatness of civilization, a stark contrast to the worn attire of the rest of us. He was quick to laugh, quick to learn, full of questions. Jackson, a burly man in his 30s with a thick, unkempt beard, was swinging a pickaxe nearby, clearing brush. He was strong, powerful, but his temper was as short as his patience, his voice a booming bass that echoed off the canyon walls when he complained, and he complained often. Miguel, quiet and wiry, was just a few feet from Billy, digging out a stubborn rock. Miguel was mid-20s, dark eyes that watched everything, saying little, moving with an almost feline grace. He was pragmatic, steady, a reliable hand. He often carried a small, worn, leather-bound book, Spanish poems which he'd read by firelight. That morning, the routine was as normal as it ever got out here. The scrape of shovels, the occasional clink of rock, Jackson's grumbling, Billy's humming a tune he'd picked up in Tucson, the distant thin whine of the transit as Silas adjusted it, the oppressive sun beating down. There was a stillness, though, that felt deeper than usual. The desert always had its silences, but this was different. A lack of even the usual buzzing of insects, the distant cry of a hawk, just the ringing in your ears that came from too much sun and too much quiet. I dismissed it as the heat playing tricks on the senses, or maybe the stillness that sometimes preceded a dust devil. I was checking a sightline myself, my back to the rising wall of red stone, when Silas let out a small, choked sound. It wasn't a cry of pain, not yet. More like the gasp a man makes when a sudden cold takes his breath. Then, nothing. Just the ringing silence of the desert after a sound has ceased, and the sun still beating down, hotter than ever. I turned quickly. Silas was no longer at the transit. The instrument stood there, a lonely sentinel, its brass gleaming in the sun. No Silas, no sound. My eyes scanned the immediate area. He was gone. "Silas?" I called out. my voice sounding too loud in the sudden, absolute quiet. Jackson stopped swinging his pickaxe, his heavy breathing the only sound. Miguel stood up slowly, his dark eyes narrowed, scanning the ground. Billy, still holding the stadia rod, looked around, a puzzled frown on his face. "Where'd he go?" Jackson mumbled, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a hand. I walked to the transit. The ground around it was disturbed. Not much, just a scuff mark, a small depression, as if something heavy had landed, then launched itself. The tripod of the transit was slightly askew. No tracks, though, not of a man. The fine dust of the canyon floor was oddly smooth in places, then ruffled in others. "Split up. Check the immediate area," I ordered, my voice calm, but my gut tightening. He can't have gone far. We fanned out, calling Silas's name. The canyon swallowed our calls, making them sound thin and lost. The silence that followed was heavy, no echo returning. Jackson was the first to show the crack in his composure. "This ain't right, McCready. He wouldn't just up and walk off. Not Silas." His booming voice was laced with an unfamiliar tremor. "Keep looking," I said, trying to project a certainty I didn't feel. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, a snake bite, a sudden illness. But there was no sign of struggle, no cry, just that choked gasp and then silence. A man doesn't simply vanish into thin air. Not in a wide-open canyon, not in broad daylight. We searched for a good half hour, pushing through the sparse scrub, climbing low rocks, our eyes scanning every shadow, every crevice. Nothing. It was as if the desert had simply swallowed him whole. The heat, which had been a nuisance, now felt malevolent, pressing down, blurring the line between reality and something else. A cold dread began to seep in, a feeling that went beyond mere concern, settling deep in the pit of my stomach. Silas was gone, and there was no sensible reason for it. Just a disturbed patch of earth and an unsettling, unnatural silence. "He's gone," Jackson finally said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, his bluster gone. Something took him. I looked at the others. Billy's eager eyes were wide with fear. Miguel's face was impassive, but his dark eyes held a deep, ancient understanding that made the hairs on my neck prickle. I pushed down the rising unease. Logic, I told myself. There had to be a logical explanation. But the desert was vast, and sometimes logic seemed a very small thing here. We gathered back at the transit, the silence pressing in. My hand instinctively went to the rifle slung on my shoulder. It felt like cold steel against my skin, a small comfort against the growing, formless dread. We stood there, 4 men in the vast red maw of the canyon, each of us feeling the absence of Silas like a physical weight. The sun was directly overhead now, beating down mercilessly, the air still and heavy. Then the shadow fell. Not the slow drift of a cloud, but a sudden massive eclipse that swallowed the sun whole for a breath, plunging the canyon into an unnatural twilight. It was vast, impossibly vast, blotting out the world, stealing the light. Then came the wind, a sudden, violent gust that tore at our hats and sent a shiver through the dry air, carrying with it a smell, something sharp, acrid, like old leather, and something else, something deeply wrong, like burnt meat, and something ancient. I heard a shriek, high and raw, tearing through the air, but too deep for a bird and too animal for a man. My eyes, still adjusting to the sudden gloom, darted upwards and saw it. It was naked, muscular, its skin a dark, weathered hide, not quite human, not quite animal. Its wings, vast and leathery, stretched out, easily 40 feet from tip to tip, beating the air with a terrible, slow power. A humanoid figure, gaunt and angular, its face a blur of dark features against the searing sky, Its hands and feet ended in curved talons, impossibly long and sharp. Before my hand could even find the rifle slung on my shoulder, before my mind could process what my eyes were seeing, Billy was gone from beside Miguel. One moment he was there, a scared kid with sandy hair. The next, he was 20 feet in the air, a small, flailing figure against the impossibly vast, leathery spread of wings that had just blotted out the sky. A scream tore from Billy's throat, high-pitched and raw with terror, echoing off the canyon walls. The creature held him, one massive, taloned hand clamped onto his shoulder, the other around his waist, lifting him effortlessly, its head turned, its gaunt, angular face momentarily clear, revealing intelligent, furious eyes and a mouth filled with human-like teeth twisted into something that was not a grin, but a rictus of predatory intent. It beat its wings once, twice with slow, deliberate power. Jackson let out a choked cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. Miguel stood frozen, his eyes wide, his quiet composure shattered by the impossible sight. We were all paralyzed, watching in horror as the creature, this nightmare blend of man and bat, ascended into the sky. It rose higher, carrying the screaming boy, a tiny, struggling doll held fast in its talons towards the dark, waiting caves of the jagged cliff face. The sun, finally free of the impossible shadow, beat down once more, but the light now felt wrong, tainted. Billy's screams diminished, growing fainter, until they were swallowed by the vast, indifferent silence of the canyon. The silence after Billy's screams were swallowed was not empty. It was filled with the frantic beating of my own heart, with the ragged breaths of Jackson, and with the sudden, terrible understanding that had just sucker-punched logic from my mind. Billy was gone, lifted by that thing. My rifle was in my hands before I knew I'd moved. The cold steel felt good, solid. Jackson, still making choked animal sounds, fumbled with his own Winchester. Miguel, always quick, already had his leveled, though I knew, we all knew, it was useless. The creature was 100 feet up, a dark, impossible shape against the blinding glare of the sun. It was already nearing the jagged peaks that formed the northern wall of the canyon, where the rock was pockmarked with those dark, silent caves. "Billy," I roared, the sound raw and desperate, lost almost immediately to the vastness. It was a reflex, a plea to a world that had just gone mad. The creature didn't falter. Its immense wings beat with a slow, deliberate rhythm, carrying it steadily higher. Billy's small form was still visible, a struggling doll in its grasp. He was kicking weakly, a testament to the stubborn, desperate fight of youth. "Shoot it, McCready! Shoot the goddamn thing!" Jackson yelled, his voice cracking, panic making him incoherent. He was already firing, wild shots that kicked up dust far from the impossibly high target, the crack of the rifle sounding puny against the enormity of the sky. "No!" I yelled back, my voice sharp, cutting through his hysteria. "You'll hit him!" Miguel didn't fire. He just watched, his face grim, his rifle held steady, tracking the ascending horror. His eyes, usually so calm, held a cold, ancient fear I'd never seen before. We ran. Not with any plan, just instinct, towards the cliff face, towards the impossibly high caves where we knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that creature was taking him. The ground was loose, uneven, and the sun, now unblocked, was a hammer again, but its heat was nothing compared to the cold dread that had settled in my bones. Every step was a fight against the terrain, against the rising panic, against the insane notion that we were chasing a myth. My eyes never left the creature. It was a monstrous thing, naked, its muscular form defined by the sun, the dark, weathered hide of its skin catching the light like old leather. The 40-foot wingspan was not an exaggeration. It was a living, breathing shadow that moved with an effortless power that mocked our desperate scramble below. I could see the gaunt, angular face, even from that distance, turned slightly towards the cliff face, its focus absolute. It was a predator, and Billy was its prey. "Billy!" I shouted again, my voice hoarse, praying for some miracle, some sign, and then a flicker, a movement. Billy impossibly was struggling. He was still kicking, still fighting. He had one arm free. It was a small, almost imperceptible motion against the vastness of the creature's body, but it was there. My heart hammered, a desperate, foolish hope sparking. He had his surveying knife. The one I'd given him, a good, solid blade, sharp as a razor. He'd kept it tucked into his belt, always. A habit, a comfort. Now a weapon. He twisted, a surge of desperate strength born of pure terror. He brought the knife up, a flash of steel, and plunged it, with all the meager force a 19-year-old boy could muster, into the creature's leg, the leg that held him. The creature's reaction was immediate and horrifying. An anguished scream tore through the air. Not the shriek I'd heard before, but something else. Something disturbingly human. A sound of raw, unadulterated pain that ripped through the canyon, echoing off the red rock walls, each reverberation a fresh spike of ice in my gut. It was a sound that should not have come from that thing. Its grip faltered. The talons, impossibly strong, now seemed to loosen, to spasm. Billy was still there, for a breath suspended, then the creature's hold gave way entirely. He fell. 20 feet, maybe more. He was a rag doll, tumbling, flailing against the blue sky, his sandy hair a blur, his small body plummeting towards the canyon floor. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The end. But the desert, which had given us so much grief, now offered a strange, brutal mercy. Below, nestled against a low rock outcropping, was a dense stand of scrub brush, thick with thorny mesquite and prickly pear. Billy hit it with a sickening thud, a sound that was muffled by the thicket, but still reached us, a dull, wet impact that made Jackson cry out again. We didn't stop. We ran harder, faster, stumbling over rocks and roots, eyes fixed on the spot where he disappeared. The creature, meanwhile, was not gone. It hung in the air, a dark, furious angel, its massive wings beating slowly, keeping it aloft. Its gaunt, angular face was turned towards us, towards the spot where Billy had fallen. The intelligent, furious eyes were burning, locked onto us. Its mouth was open, stretched wide, not in another scream, but in a strange guttural sound, almost like words, but in a language so ancient, so alien, that it twisted my mind to even conceive of it. A low vibrating growl rumbled deep in its chest, a sound of profound pain mixed with blinding fury. It circled once, a slow, menacing pass, directly over the scrub brush, as if contemplating another descent. The air crackled with its rage. Then, with another piercing cry, a shriek that ripped through the air like tearing canvas, it turned. It banked sharply, its immense wings catching the thermal currents, and soared away back towards the mountain caves. It didn't look back. It just left. A dark, living shadow disappearing into the high, inaccessible recesses of the cliff face, leaving behind only the ringing silence, the scent of dust and old leather, and a trail of impossible dark blood that drifted down, like black rain, to stain the red rocks below. We reached the scrub brush, our lungs burning, our legs screaming. The thorns tore at our clothes, scraped our skin, but we pushed through, oblivious. "Billy!" I yelled, plunging into the thicket, my eyes frantically searching. Miguel was ahead of me, already kneeling. "Here," he said, his voice quiet, calm, a lifeline in the chaos. Billy was a crumpled heap at the base of the thickest mesquite. His eyes were open, wide, staring, but they held no recognition, just a vast, unfathomable terror. A thin line of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. One leg was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. His shirt was torn, shredded, and across his shoulders, stark against his pale skin, were 2 deep, ragged gashes, 4 cruel lines where the creature's talons had clamped down. They were bleeding freely, dark red against the dust and the pale fabric. I knelt beside him, my hands shaking as I checked him over. He was breathing shallow, ragged gasps. His body was limp, but he was alive. Alive, a miracle, born of sheer desperate will and a surveying knife. "He's alive," I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It was a statement of fact, but it carried the weight of a dozen unspoken horrors. Jackson stumbled up, his face ashen, eyes darting from Billy to the sky, then back again. God Almighty, he's alive." His voice was a whisper stripped bare of all bluster. The burly man was shaking, openly, uncontrollably. Miguel, ever pragmatic, began to gather firewood, his movements calm, deliberate. He knew we needed a fire, not for warmth, but for comfort, for a small, flickering barrier against the encroaching darkness. He still kept an eye on the high caves, his expression unreadable. I sat beside Billy, watching him, watching the sky. The sun was still high, still beating down, but the world had shifted. The light was different. The air was different. The silence that now permeated the canyon was no longer just the absence of sound. It was a watchful, waiting silence. A silence that held a memory of screams, human and inhuman. Silas was gone. We knew that now with a terrible, absolute certainty. The creature had taken him, devoured him perhaps, in those dark caves, and it had nearly taken Billy. But Billy had fought back. He had plunged a piece of civilization, a simple surveying knife, into the heart of an ancient horror. And it had bled. That was the impossible truth. I looked at my hands. They were steady now, but they felt alien. They had bound the wounds of a boy who had fallen from the sky, rescued from the talons of a creature that defied all reason. My mind, trained in logic, in measurement, in the precise mapping of the tangible world, was reeling. The lines of my reality had been irrevocably blurred. The sun began its slow descent, painting the canyon walls in hues of deeper red and long, stretching shadows. The air cooled, but the chill in my heart remained. We had survived, but the cost was already immeasurable. Billy, lying there, broken and silent, was proof of that. And the lingering scent of old leather and something acrid clinging to the air was proof that some things simply could not be mapped. Some things refused to be tamed, and some things once seen could never be unseen. The world was larger and far more terrifying than any of us had ever dared to imagine. And we were just men with our rifles and our transits, utterly unprepared for the true wilderness that lay hidden in the high places. We spent the rest of that day and the long night huddled together, a small, fragile circle against the immensity of the canyon. Billy was delirious, his fever a thin veil over the terror in his eyes. Miguel tended to his leg, splinting it as best he could with scavenged wood and strips of canvas. Jackson sat apart nursing a bottle, his usual bluster replaced by a deep, guttural tremor that shook his whole frame. He wasn't a man for silence, but now silence was all he had. The sun, when it finally crawled back over the eastern rim, brought with it a harsh, cold light that offered no comfort. It simply illuminated the wreckage. The disturbed ground where Silas had been, then where Billy had fallen. I began to search methodically, ignoring the buzzing fear that still clung to the air like dust. My mind needed order. It needed facts. Near the base of the cliff where the creature had landed, the ground was churned, and there, pressed into the dry red dirt, were impressions. Not animal tracks, not quite human. They were handprints, distinct and deep. But the fingers were too long, unnaturally so, ending in blunt, powerful tips, not nails, like a man's hand stretched and warped, impossibly strong. A chilling signature. And the blood. Dark, almost black where it had congealed on the rocks and sand. It was a trail leading away from where Billy had been dropped towards the cliff face, towards the caves. Not much, but enough to confirm. The creature had been hurt, and it had bled. Miguel quietly pointed to something caught on a low-hanging mesquite branch near the edge of the scrub where Billy had landed. I walked over, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It was a feather, not a bird's feather, not like any I'd ever seen. It was nearly 2 feet long, dark, with a strange, almost reptilian sheen to it. Not soft, not delicate. It was leathery, like cured hide, tough and flexible, with a faint, almost metallic smell. A grotesque trophy left behind, irrefutable proof. I picked it up, feeling its unnatural weight, its alien texture. This was not a dream. This was real, and it was terrifying. The journey back to Tucson was a blur of pain and silence. Billy, his leg expertly splinted by Miguel, lay on a makeshift stretcher carried by Jackson and me. Every jolt, every rock was a fresh agony for him, though he rarely cried out. He just stared, his eyes wide, tracking the sky, the distant cliff face, the very air. He was there, but he wasn't with us. The boy who had loved the frontier was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of fear. I carried the feather wrapped in canvas, a secret weight against my hip. The handprints I knew would be gone, scoured by the desert winds. The blood would dry, turn to dust. But the feather was solid, tangible. In Tucson, the doctor was a small, fussy man, more concerned with cleanliness than wilderness tales. He examined Billy, clucked over the shattered tibia, the deep talon wounds that marred his shoulders. Nasty fall, he muttered, shaking his head. And those marks? What kind of animal did that? I looked at him, my voice flat. No animal, doctor. Not one you'd recognize. He dismissed it with a wave. The desert's full of strange creatures, Mr. McCready. Best not to dwell on it. But I pressed him. I explained the blood, the dark smears we'd found. I told him it was from the creature that had taken Billy. He scoffed, but I insisted, my voice low, firm. Test it, doctor, please. Just test it. He did, more out of professional obligation than belief. A few days later, his office, filled with the smell of carbolic acid and stale cigar smoke, was quiet. He looked at me over his spectacles, his face pale, bewildered. Mr. McCready, he said, his voice a strained whisper, that the blood, it's human. Type O, to be exact. Completely human, but it's old, degraded, not fresh, not from any man living in this territory, not in the way it's structured. It's anomalous. He shook his head again, a slow, disbelieving motion. It makes no sense. It made perfect, horrifying sense to me. The creature had bled, and its blood was human. A chill deeper than any desert night settled in my bones. The doctor's bewildered confession was the final nail in the coffin of my ordered world. Logic, science, the precise measurements of man, none of it could explain what we had seen, what Billy had endured, what that feather represented. My mind, usually a fortress of practicality, now sought different foundations, ancient ones. I found Chayton in a small, remote camp, nestled in a hidden crease of the mountains miles from any map. He sat by a low fire, the smell of juniper smoke thick in the air. His face was a map of deep lines. His eyes, like polished obsidian, held the weight of generations. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He simply offered me a place by his fire. I laid the feather on the rock beside him. It lay there, a dark alien thing against the warm glow of the embers. The coyote calls were distant but present, a constant hum in the twilight. "Skywalker, see," I said, my voice flat, the words tasting strange on my tongue. I pushed the feather with a finger. "This thing, you know of it." Chayton grunted. "Our people know, always before the white man, or before the horse." He looked at me, his gaze unnervingly direct, seeing not just me, but the horror I carried. "You disturb the old places. They do not forget." "The blood," I pressed, ignoring the accusation, my focus narrow. "They said it was human, the doctor in Tucson." Chayton's lips barely moved. "Once, long ago. They took the path of the mountain, not the earth. Forbidden. They changed. But the blood remembers." He looked to the distant dark cliff face, a silent knowing gesture. "It hunts." He spoke of beings that had once walked the earth as men, of rituals performed in the high places, rituals that twisted flesh and spirit, transforming them into something else entirely, something that gained wings and strength, but lost its soul, trapped between worlds, forever bound to the ancient, inaccessible caves. He spoke of the mountain's anger, of warnings ignored, of a hunger that never truly ceased. His words were not myth. They were history. A history far older, far more terrifying than any I had known. The world was not just large, it was layered. And we, with our transits and our ambition, had stumbled into a layer we were never meant to see. I returned to the Southern Pacific office, a place of order and maps and predictable routes, a place that felt impossibly distant from the canyon. I made my report. I recounted everything clinically, precisely, leaving out no detail, holding nothing back. I even presented the feather. The men in charge, solid, practical men in pressed suits, listened. Their faces, at first concerned, slowly hardened into expressions of polite skepticism, then open disbelief. They spoke of heat stroke, of shared delusion, of the stresses of the frontier. The feather was dismissed as a hoax, perhaps a large bat wing, cleverly manipulated. The doctor's report on the blood was deemed an anomaly, a likely contamination, or the doctor himself, perhaps, was a charlatan. "Mr. McCready," the regional supervisor said, his voice firm, dismissive, "we understand the hardships you faced, but this is simply not possible. We have schedules. We have investors. We have a railway to build." The survey, they concluded, would be rerouted, quietly. No official reason given, of course. A slight adjustment for unforeseen geological challenges, they'd say. The incident was buried, filed away in unofficial logs, dismissed as the ravings of men unhinged by the sun and isolation. The world, it seemed, preferred its monsters to remain in books, not in the sky. No one wanted to believe. And so the world simply forgot. Or rather, it chose to forget. It built its railway, connecting distant towns, bringing order to the wilderness. But the wilderness, I knew, held secrets that no railway could ever truly tame. Years passed. The railroad tracks stretched across the desert, gleaming lines of steel carving a path through the vast, indifferent landscape. The canyon, Devil's Gulch, became just another name on a map, its secrets undisturbed, its high caves silent once more. Billy Hatcher, the 19-year-old boy who had dreamed of the frontier, never truly recovered. His leg healed, but the limp remained, a constant reminder. The talon scars on his shoulders, deep and ragged, became a permanent part of his skin, a cruel brand. He rarely spoke of what he saw, what he felt. He simply lived, his eyes holding a silent, unshakable dread that never truly faded. The boy who was quick to laugh, quick to learn, was gone. In his place was a man who saw shadows where others saw sun, who heard whispers in the wind that others dismissed as desert sounds. He was alive, yes, but he was forever broken, forever marked by the impossible. He carried the indelible proof of a world far vaster, far more ancient than any man should ever have to bear. I, Thomas Macready, carried my own burden, the knowledge, the inability to unsee. I saw the world differently now. The vast empty skies held a new, chilling potential. The high, inaccessible places of the earth were no longer just geological formations. They were waiting places. I still surveyed, still mapped, still drew lines on paper, but now every line felt tentative, every measurement incomplete. My logic, once my shield, was now a fragile thing, perpetually threatened by the memory of impossible wings and human blood. I kept the feather. It lies now in a small locked box, hidden away from prying eyes, from a world that would mock its existence. 2 feet long, leathery and dark, it is a silent, grotesque testament. A relic from a time when the sky had a different kind of inhabitant, when the ancient earth stirred with a life that defied all understanding. The world wants to believe it is alone. It wants to believe it is supreme. It wants to map every inch, tame every wild place, explain every mystery. But there are things ancient and powerful that simply refuse to be mapped, things that refuse to be tamed. And in the high, lonely canyons of Arizona, in the dark, silent mouths of caves that honeycomb the ancient cliffs, something still waits. Patiently, silently. A living secret, a testament to a truth humanity is not yet ready to face. And sometimes when the wind blows just right, carrying the scent of dust and distant minerals, I can almost feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. Because some things once seen can never be unseen, and some truths, once known, can never be forgotten. The world, I knew then, was far from finished with its terrors.